Watch the two young men attempting to burn books by the fire pit. The one on the left is Asad. He and his twin brother just gathered these Bibles to destroy them as a prank. Then something supernatural happens, extinguishing their flames completely.
My name is Asad. I'm 28 years old now, and what I'm about to tell you happened on December 8th, 2018. That night, my twin brother and I tried to burn a stack of Bibles as a stupid prank. We had no idea we were about to encounter Jesus Christ himself. I need to take you back to understand how we got to that December night. My twin brother and I were raised in what you'd call a textbook Muslim household. Our father was a devout man who never missed a single prayer, and our mother wore her hijab with the kind of pride that came from deep conviction. Every morning at 5 a.m., we'd hear the call to prayer echoing through our house, and by 5:15, the entire family would be on our prayer rugs facing Mecca. We lived and breathed Islam. The Quran wasn't just a book in our home, it was the foundation of everything we did, everything we thought, everything we were supposed to become. My brother and I had memorized large portions of it by the time we were 12. Our parents would beam with pride when we recited verses perfectly during family gatherings, and relatives would pat our heads and tell us we were going to be good Muslim men. But here's the thing about being twins that people don't always understand. We shared everything, including our doubts. When one of us started questioning something, the other would feel it too. It was like we had this invisible connection that meant we couldn't hide our true thoughts from each other, even when we were hiding them from everyone else. The questioning started small. Why did we have to pray 5 times a day when once felt like enough? Why couldn't we eat certain foods that our non-Muslim friends enjoyed without consequence? Why did our sister have to cover her hair when our male cousins could walk around however they pleased? These weren't the kind of questions you could ask out loud in our house. Our father had a way of shutting down doubt with a stern look and a reminder about respecting Allah's will. So my brother and I learned to whisper our questions to each other late at night, when the house was quiet. We'd lie in our beds and wonder if there might be other ways to understand God, other paths that didn't feel so restrictive. Ask yourself this question. Have you ever felt trapped by the religion you were born into? Have you ever wondered if the faith your parents chose for you was really the faith your heart was searching for? As we moved into our teenage years, that quiet questioning turned into something more like rebellion. We started skipping prayers when our parents weren't looking. We'd tell them we were going to youth group at the mosque, but instead we'd hang out at the park or the mall, talking about everything except Islam. We began to resent the way our entire lives revolved around religious obligations that felt more like chains than choices. I remember one Friday afternoon when we were supposed to be at Juma prayer. My brother looked at me and said something that shocked me, even though I'd been thinking the same thing. He said, "What if we're wrong about all of this? What if there's something else out there that makes more sense?" That was the first time either of us had voiced what we'd been feeling for months. The resentment grew stronger when Christian missionaries started appearing in our neighborhood. They'd leave literature at the mosque, and sometimes they'd even approach people on the street to talk about Jesus. Our father would come home furious about these encounters, calling them disrespectful and ignorant. He'd lecture us about how Christianity was a corrupted version of the truth, how Jesus was just a prophet, not the Son of God. But instead of making us more committed to Islam, these encounters made us more curious about what these Christians actually believed. Why were they so passionate about their faith that they'd risk offending people to share it? What did they know that we didn't? my brother and I started paying attention to the Christian families in our school, watching how they lived, how they treated each other, how they talked about their beliefs. Looking back now, I can see how pride was leading us toward destruction. We weren't genuinely seeking truth, we were looking for ways to prove our parents wrong. We wanted to rebel, and Christianity seemed like the ultimate rebellion. If Islam was everything our family stood for, then maybe exploring Christianity was the perfect way to assert our independence. The anger really started building when we found gospel literature that had been left outside our mosque. It wasn't just that someone had distributed Christian materials on holy ground. It was that they'd done it repeatedly. Week after week, we'd see new pamphlets and booklets scattered around the entrance. Our father and other men from the mosque would gather them up and dispose of them, muttering about the audacity of these Christians. My brother and I started collecting some of these materials before the adults could throw them away. We'd hide them in our room and read them late at night, not because we believed what they said, but because we were fascinated by how different they were from everything we'd been taught. These pamphlets talked about a God who loved unconditionally, who wanted a personal relationship with each person, who had sacrificed his own son for humanity's salvation. It bothered us more than we wanted to admit. The God described in these Christian materials seemed so much more personal, so much more loving than the Allah we'd learned about. But instead of considering that maybe there was truth in these messages, we decided we needed to do something to defend our faith, to prove our loyalty to Islam, and to show these Christians that we weren't going to be converted by their literature. That's when my brother came up with the idea that would change everything. He suggested we gather all the Christian materials we could find and burn them publicly, maybe even record it to post online. We thought we were being brave defenders of Islam, standing up against foreign influence and protecting our community's faith. We had no idea we were about to walk straight into an encounter with the living God. The discovery happened on a Tuesday afternoon when we were walking home from school. There it was, sitting right outside the main entrance of our mosque like some kind of challenge. A cardboard box filled with what had to be at least 20 New Testament Bibles. Not just pamphlets this time, not just little booklets, but actual full Bibles with leather covers and gold-edged pages. Someone had left them there deliberately, and they weren't even trying to be subtle about it. My brother saw them first and grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. His eyes were blazing with the kind of anger I'd seen in our father's face when he talked about Christian missionaries. But there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like excitement. He whispered to me that this was it. This was our chance to do something that would make a real statement. We stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just staring at that box and watching other people from our community discover it. Some of the older men were shaking their heads in disgust, muttering prayers under their breath. A few of the younger guys were picking up individual Bibles and flipping through them with expressions of disbelief. Everyone seemed offended, but no one seemed to know exactly what to do about it. That's when my brother leaned over and whispered his plan. He said we should take some of these Bibles home, wait until the weekend when our parents would be visiting relatives, and then burn them in our backyard. But not just burn them quietly, he said. We should record the whole thing, post it online, make it into something that would show our entire community that we weren't going to tolerate this kind of disrespect. The more he talked about it, the more excited I became. This felt like the perfect way to prove ourselves, to show that we were serious about defending our faith. We'd been feeling like outsiders in our own religion for so long, questioning everything, feeling guilty about our doubts. Here was a chance to do something that would demonstrate our loyalty beyond question. We waited until most people had gone inside for afternoon prayers. Then we casually walked over to the box and each grabbed 3 Bibles. I remember how heavy they felt in my hands, much heavier than I'd expected. The leather covers were soft and expensive looking, and I found myself wondering who had spent money to buy all these books, just to give them away to people who didn't want them. Getting them home without our parents noticing required some careful planning. We stuffed them into our backpacks and walked through the front door like nothing had happened. Our mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and our father was in his study reading. We managed to get to our room without anyone asking what we were carrying. Once we had the door closed and locked, we spread all 6 Bibles out on my bed and just looked at them. They were beautiful books, I had to admit. The pages were thin but high quality, and there were ribbons attached to mark important passages. Someone had put real care into making these Bibles, real thought into how they would look and feel in someone's hands. My brother picked up one of them and opened it randomly. The page he landed on was in the Gospel of John, and even though we didn't really believe in what it said, we found ourselves reading a few verses. It was talking about Jesus being the light of the world, about how anyone who followed him would never walk in darkness. The language was beautiful, even if we thought the message was wrong. But then my brother slammed the book shut and reminded me why we were doing this. These books represented everything that was trying to corrupt our faith, everything that was trying to pull us away from the truth we'd been raised with. We weren't supposed to find them beautiful or interesting. We were supposed to see them as a threat that needed to be eliminated. We spent the rest of that week planning exactly how we'd do it. My brother suggested we wait until the weekend when our parents would be gone for most of Saturday, visiting our grandmother across town. We'd set up our phone to record everything, maybe even live stream it if we could figure out how. We practiced what we'd say, how we'd explain why we were doing this, what message we wanted to send. The plan was simple. We'd build a fire in the metal fire pit our father had installed in the backyard for family gatherings. We'd arrange the Bibles around it, maybe say a few words about defending Islam and rejecting false teachings. Then we'd light them up and let the flames do the talking. Looking back now, I realize how much my heart was racing every time we talked about the plan. I kept telling myself it was excitement, anticipation, for finally doing something meaningful for our faith. But if I'm being completely honest, there was something else there too. Something that felt almost like dread, like I was walking toward the edge of a cliff without knowing how far the drop was. My brother seemed completely confident about what we were doing. He talked about it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like burning religious books was just something people did when they wanted to make a point. But I found myself lying awake at night, thinking about those beautiful leather covers, those carefully printed pages, the ribbons that someone had sewn in to help readers find their place. The Saturday finally arrived. Our parents left for grandmother's house right after breakfast, promising they'd be back by evening. We had the whole day to ourselves, but we decided to wait until late at night to do the burning. Somehow it felt like something that should happen in darkness, something that needed the cover of night to feel right. We spent the day trying to act normal, but I could tell my brother was just as nervous as I was. We kept checking and rechecking our plan, making sure we had everything we needed: matches, lighter fluid, the phone set up to record, and of course the 6 Bibles we'd hidden in our closet. As the sun went down, my heart started beating so hard, I was sure my brother could hear it. We were about to cross a line that we couldn't uncross, about to do something that would define us in ways we didn't yet understand. I had no idea we were walking straight into an encounter that would change everything we thought we knew about God, about faith, about ourselves. At 11:30 p.m., we finally made our move. The house was completely quiet. Our parents had been asleep for over an hour, and the neighborhood was dark except for a few streetlights. My brother and I crept out to the backyard carrying our supplies, like we were embarking on some kind of sacred mission. The December air was cold enough that we could see our breath, and I remember thinking, that seemed fitting somehow, like even the weather was preparing for what we were about to do. We'd done this kind of thing before, building fires in our backyard fire pit for family gatherings and celebrations. It was a simple metal bowl that my father had bought years earlier, sturdy and reliable. We knew exactly how to get a good fire going, how much kindling to use, where to place the logs for maximum flame. This should have been easy, routine even. But something felt different from the very beginning. My brother arranged the kindling while I set up my phone on a lawn chair, angling it to capture the fire pit and both of us in the frame. We'd decided to record everything, partly as evidence of what we'd done, but mainly because we wanted to share this moment with our friends online. We thought we were about to become heroes in our community, young men who'd stood up for Islam when others had only complained. The kindling caught fire easily enough. Within minutes, we had a decent flame going, hot enough that we had to step back a few feet. The orange light danced across our faces, and I felt that familiar excitement you get when you're standing close to a fire on a cold night. Everything was going according to plan. We pulled the 6 Bibles out of the bag we'd hidden them in and arranged them in a neat stack beside the fire pit. My brother picked up the first Bible, the one with the darkest leather cover, and held it up toward the camera. He started to say something about defending our faith and rejecting false teachings, but his voice cracked halfway through, and he had to start over. I thought he was just nervous about being on camera, but looking back, I wonder if something deeper was already happening to him. When he finally finished his little speech, he opened the Bible to a random page and held it toward the flames. This was the moment we'd been planning for all week. The paper should have caught fire immediately, should have curled and blackened and turned to ash within seconds. But instead, something impossible happened. The page wouldn't catch. At first, I thought maybe the paper was too thick, or maybe there wasn't enough airflow to feed the flames properly. My brother held the page closer to the fire, so close that the heat should have been unbearable on his hands. But nothing happened. The page remained perfectly white, perfectly intact, like the fire wasn't even touching it. We tried with a second Bible, then a third. Same result every time. The pages would come within inches of the flames, close enough that we could feel the heat on our faces, but they simply would not burn. My brother was getting frustrated, muttering under his breath about cheap paper and poor quality printing. He grabbed a handful of loose pages from one of the Bibles and shoved them directly into the center of the fire. The flames went out. Not just dimmed, not just flickered. They went out completely, as if someone had poured a bucket of water over them. We stood there in sudden darkness, staring at a fire pit full of cold ashes and perfectly preserved Bible pages. The only light came from distant streetlights, and the only sound was our own heavy breathing. My brother immediately started trying to relight the fire. He added more kindling, more lighter fluid, struck match after match. But every time he got a flame going and tried to burn one of those Bible pages, the same thing would happen. The fire would extinguish itself the moment the paper got close. That's when I started to feel it. This presence, this sense that we were not alone in that backyard. It started as just a feeling of being watched, like when you sense someone looking at you from across a room. But it grew stronger with each failed attempt to burn those pages. The air around us felt thicker, heavier, charged with something I couldn't identify. My brother felt it too. I could see it in his face, the way his eyes kept darting around the backyard, like he was looking for someone hiding in the shadows. His hands were shaking as he struck another match, and not from the cold. We'd been out there for maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours had passed. Then came the wind. Not a gentle breeze, not the kind of winter air you'd expect on a December night. This was a powerful, focused gust that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It hit us so suddenly and with such force that we both stumbled backward, nearly falling over the lawn chairs behind us. The wind extinguished what little fire we'd managed to restart, scattered the Bible pages across the yard, and left us standing in complete darkness. But more than that, it brought with it this overwhelming sense of presence. Not just the feeling of being watched anymore, but the absolute certainty that something infinitely powerful was standing right there with us. I've tried to explain this to people before, and words never seem adequate. Have you ever walked into a room and immediately known that something significant had happened there, even though you couldn't see any evidence of it? Have you ever felt so strongly that someone was looking at you that you turned around, absolutely certain you'd see them there? This was like that, but magnified beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The temperature had dropped dramatically. I don't mean it got a little chilly because the fire went out. I mean the air around us became so cold that our breath came out in thick clouds, and I could feel goosebumps raising on my arms even through my heavy jacket. But at the same time, there was this warmth radiating from somewhere else, somewhere I couldn't identify. My brother and I looked at each other in the dim light, and I saw in his eyes the same terror and confusion I was feeling. This wasn't natural. This wasn't weather or coincidence or equipment failure. Something supernatural was happening, and we both knew it. We were no longer in control of this situation, maybe had never been in control to begin with. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just quiet, but absolute silence. No cars in the distance, no dogs barking, no wind in the trees. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. That's when my legs gave out. I didn't choose to fall to my knees. My legs simply stopped supporting me, like someone had cut the strings holding up a marionette. One moment I was standing there in shock, staring at the scattered Bible pages and cold ashes, and the next moment I was on the ground with my knees pressed into the cold winter grass. My brother collapsed at exactly the same instant, as if we were connected by invisible wires. But here's what I need you to understand. This wasn't fear that brought us down. Yes, we were terrified, but this was something deeper than terror. It was recognition. My entire body seemed to know something that my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Every cell in my body was responding to a presence that I couldn't see but couldn't deny. The moment my knees hit the ground, words started pouring out of my mouth. Not words I was choosing, not words I was thinking. They were coming from somewhere deeper than my conscious mind, flowing out of me like water from a broken dam. And they weren't in Arabic, the language of my prayers since childhood. They weren't even in English, the language of my thoughts. They were in something I'd never learned but somehow understood perfectly. I was calling on Jesus, not as a prophet, not as a teacher, but as Lord. The words were coming out in what I now know was a mix of ancient Aramaic and languages I still can't identify, but their meaning was crystal clear in my heart. I was surrendering. I was acknowledging Him as the Son of God, as my Savior, as the one I'd been searching for without even knowing it. My brother was doing exactly the same thing. I could hear his voice beside me, speaking in that same inexplicable language, saying words that echoed and harmonized with mine. We'd never discussed Jesus as anything more than a prophet. We'd never even considered the possibility that Christianity might be true. Yet here we were, both of us simultaneously crying out to Him in languages we'd never spoken, with understanding we'd never possessed. The warmth I'd felt earlier was intensifying, but now I could locate its source. It was coming from above us, like standing under the warm sun on a summer day, except this was happening at midnight in December. The warmth was penetrating through my jacket, through my skin, settling into my bones and spreading throughout my entire body. But more than physical warmth, it was the warmth of being welcomed home after a lifetime of wandering. My whole understanding of God was changing in real time. The Allah I'd worshipped my entire life had felt distant, demanding, impossible to please. Even when I'd been a faithful Muslim, I'd never felt close to Him, never felt loved by Him, only obligated to Him. But this presence, this Jesus whose name was flowing from my lips, felt like pure love. Not just loving, but love itself, the source from which all love flows. I need to tell you about the peace that came next, because it's unlike anything you can imagine unless you've experienced it yourself. Have you ever been in a situation where you were carrying tremendous anxiety, fear, or guilt, and then suddenly received news that made all those feelings disappear instantly? This was like that, but magnified beyond human experience. Every worry, every doubt, every angry thought I'd ever had was simply gone, replaced by this overwhelming sense of rightness. My brother and I were weeping now, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. Tears of relief, like we'd been holding our breath our entire lives and were finally allowed to exhale. The presence around us felt so intensely loving that it was almost unbearable, like being embraced by someone who knows everything about you and loves you completely anyway. I started to understand things that no one had ever taught me. Not intellectual understanding, but heart knowledge that bypassed my mind entirely. I understood that Jesus had been calling my name long before that night. I understood that every doubt I'd had about Islam, every question that had gone unanswered, every longing for something deeper had been His voice drawing me toward this moment. The scattered Bible pages around us seemed to be glowing now, not with physical light, but with significance. These weren't just books we'd tried to burn. They were love letters, written specifically for us, containing truths we desperately needed to hear. I found myself crawling toward the nearest page, not to destroy it, but to read it, to see what message it contained. The page I picked up was from the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have eternal life. I'd heard those words before, probably read them in one of the Christian pamphlets we'd collected. But now, they weren't just words on a page. They were a personal message, spoken directly to my heart in that backyard. My brother had found a different page from Romans chapter 10, verse 9. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. He was reading it out loud, but his voice was different now, filled with wonder and recognition. These weren't foreign concepts anymore. They were truths we'd somehow always known but had never been able to access. Look inside your own heart right now. Can you remember a time when something you'd always believed suddenly shifted? When a new understanding came so powerfully that it changed everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world? That's what was happening to us, but it was happening to our souls, not just our minds. We stayed on our knees for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 or 30 minutes. We weren't cold anymore, despite the December air. We weren't afraid anymore, despite being in the middle of something completely beyond our experience. We were home. We were found. We were loved by the God of the universe, and nothing else mattered. When we finally stood up, we were different people than we'd been when we'd knelt down. Not just changed in our beliefs or our understanding, but transformed at the deepest level of our being. The old Assad, the one who'd planned to burn Bibles as a prank, was gone. In his place was someone who knew Jesus personally, who'd encountered the living God and would never be the same. We gathered up every single Bible page, handling them like precious treasures instead of objects to be destroyed. We carried them inside and stayed up until sunrise, reading together, marveling at truth that seemed to leap off every page. We'd started that evening as Muslims, trying to defend our faith by destroying Christian books. We ended it as followers of Jesus Christ, hungry to learn everything we could about the God who had just revealed himself to us. The next morning came too soon. My brother and I had spent the entire night reading those Bibles, passing pages back and forth, pointing out verses that seemed to speak directly to our situation. We'd barely slept 2 hours when we heard our parents' car pulling into the driveway. They were returning from our grandmother's house earlier than expected, and suddenly we realized we had to face the most difficult conversation of our lives. We'd hidden the Bibles under our beds, but we couldn't hide what had happened to us. Everything about us was different. The way we looked at each other, the way we moved through the house, even the way we said good morning to our parents. My mother noticed immediately. She kept staring at us during breakfast, asking if we felt all right, commenting that we seemed different somehow. My brother and I exchanged glances across the breakfast table, and I could see in his eyes the same mixture of terror and determination I was feeling. We both knew we couldn't keep this secret. The transformation we'd experienced was too profound, too life-changing to hide. Besides, everything we'd read in those Bibles the night before had emphasized the importance of confession, of declaring our faith openly regardless of the consequences. After our parents finished eating, my brother cleared his throat and said the words that would shatter our family's world. "Father, Mother, we need to tell you something important. Last night, we gave our lives to Jesus Christ. We're Christians now." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth, and he set it down so slowly it seemed like he was moving through water. My mother's face went completely white, and her hand flew to her chest as if she was having trouble breathing. They both stared at us like we'd just announced we were aliens from another planet. Then my father exploded. I'd seen him angry before, but never like this. His face turned red, his hands shook with rage, and when he started shouting, his voice echoed through the entire house. He called us traitors, fools, disgraceful sons who had dishonored everything our family stood for. He demanded to know who had brainwashed us, what Christian missionary had gotten to us, how much money we'd been paid to betray our faith. When we tried to explain what had actually happened, about the Bibles and the fire and the supernatural encounter, he became even more furious. He said we were making up ridiculous stories to justify our rebellion, that we were using fantasy and imagination to excuse our betrayal of Islam. He refused to believe that anything supernatural had occurred, insisting that we'd simply been deceived by clever Christian propaganda. My mother's reaction was somehow worse than my father's anger. She didn't shout or rage. She just sat there with tears streaming down her face, staring at us like we were already dead. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet we could barely hear her. She asked how we could do this to her, how we could break her heart so completely, how we could throw away everything she'd taught us about honoring our family and our heritage. The hardest part wasn't losing our old life or facing an uncertain future. The hardest part was seeing the genuine pain in our mother's eyes. This woman who had given birth to us, raised us, loved us unconditionally for 19 years, was looking at us like we'd become strangers. She kept asking what she'd done wrong, where she'd failed as a mother, how she could have prevented this disaster. My father gave us an ultimatum. We had 24 hours to come to our senses, renounce Christianity, and return to Islam. If we refused, we would be disowned completely. No more financial support, no more place in the family home, no more recognition as his sons. He said he would rather have no sons than sons who had converted to the religion of crusaders and colonizers. We spent that day in our room, praying together, and reading more of the Bibles we'd tried to destroy. Every verse seemed to prepare us for exactly what we were facing. Jesus had warned his followers that they would face rejection from their families, that following him would sometimes require leaving everything behind. We found comfort in knowing that countless other believers throughout history had faced similar choices. Extended family members started arriving throughout the afternoon. Uncle after uncle, cousin after cousin, all coming to talk sense into us. They tried everything from theological arguments to emotional manipulation to outright threats. Some claimed we'd been possessed by demons. Others insisted we were going through a phase that would pass if we just stopped reading Christian materials. A few suggested we needed psychiatric treatment to cure our delusion. My uncle Hassan, who was considered the most educated in religious matters, spent 3 hours trying to prove to us that Christianity was a corrupted religion, that the Bible had been changed over the centuries, that Jesus was just a prophet who never claimed to be the Son of God. But everything he said just reinforced our certainty about what we'd experienced. The Jesus we'd encountered wasn't a mere prophet. He was God himself, and no amount of argumentation could convince us otherwise. The community religious leader came that evening. This was a man we'd respected our entire lives, someone whose wisdom had guided our family through difficult decisions. He spoke to us gently at first, explaining how Satan often appears as an angel of light to deceive believers. He suggested that what we'd experienced was demonic deception designed to pull us away from the true faith. But my brother and I had felt the presence of pure love the night before. There was nothing deceptive or evil about what had happened to us. The peace, joy, and love we'd experienced could only have come from God himself. We told the religious leader respectfully that we appreciated his concern, but we could not and would not renounce what we knew to be true. When the 24-hour deadline passed and we remained firm in our decision, my father kept his word. He packed our belongings into garbage bags and set them outside the front door. He changed the locks and told us never to return. My mother stood at the window watching us walk away, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't try to stop my father or convince him to reconsider. Ask yourself this question: what would you be willing to lose for something you knew to be absolutely true? Would you give up your family, your home, your financial security, your social connections if you were certain that doing so was the right thing to do? Because that's exactly what my brother and I faced that day. And somehow we found the strength to choose truth over comfort, eternal significance over temporary security. We walked away from our childhood home with nothing but the clothes on our backs, a few personal belongings, and 6 Bibles that had survived our attempt to destroy them. We had no money, no place to live, and no idea how we were going to survive. But we had Jesus. We had each other. And we had an unshakable conviction that we'd made the right choice. That was enough to take the first step into our new lives as followers of Christ. Finding a church that would welcome 2 former Muslims turned out to be more challenging than we'd anticipated. My brother and I spent our first week sleeping in a downtown shelter, using the days to visit different churches and explain our situation. Some pastors were suspicious, wondering if we were sincere or if this was some kind of elaborate deception. Others were enthusiastic, but completely unprepared to help former Muslims navigate the practical realities of conversion. It was at the 3rd church we visited that we met Pastor Michael, an older man with kind eyes who listened to our entire story without interrupting. When we finished telling him about the supernatural encounter in our backyard, about our family's rejection, about sleeping in shelters, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that changed everything. "Boys, you've been through more in 1 week than most Christians face in a lifetime. Let's get you some help." Pastor Michael didn't just offer us spiritual guidance. He connected us with a family in his congregation who had a basement apartment they were willing to rent to us at a price we could afford once we found jobs. He helped us apply for work at a local warehouse, where several church members were employed. Most importantly, he introduced us to other former Muslims who had become Christians, people who understood exactly what we were going through. The first time we attended a Sunday service at that church, I thought my heart might burst from joy. Here were hundreds of people singing worship songs to Jesus, the same Jesus we'd encountered in our backyard just 2 weeks earlier. When they sang Amazing Grace, tears streamed down my face because I finally understood what grace meant. We'd done nothing to earn God's love, yet He'd reached down into our rebellion and transformed our lives completely. Getting baptized was the most terrifying and wonderful experience of my life up to that point. Pastor Michael explained that baptism was a public declaration of our faith, a symbol of dying to our old lives and being raised to new life in Christ. My brother and I decided to be baptized on the same day, 3 months after our conversion. The entire church gathered to witness our testimony. Standing in that baptismal pool, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The doubts we'd harbored about Islam, the anger that had driven us to try burning those Bibles, the supernatural encounter that had brought us to our knees, the family rejection that had cost us everything we'd thought mattered. All of it had been leading to this declaration that Jesus Christ was our Lord and Savior. When Pastor Michael lowered me under the water, I felt like I was being washed clean of 19 years of confusion and searching. When I came up gasping and laughing, the entire congregation erupted in cheers and applause. My brother was baptized right after me. And seeing his face as he emerged from the water, seeing that same joy and peace I was feeling, reminded me that we were in this together, that God had saved both of us simultaneously for a reason. The learning curve was steep but exhilarating. Everything we read in the Bible seemed to address questions we'd been asking our entire lives. The concept of grace, of being saved by faith rather than works, was revolutionary for us. We'd grown up believing that we had to earn God's approval through perfect adherence to religious law. Learning that Jesus had already paid the price for our salvation, that nothing we could do would make God love us more or less, was like discovering we'd been carrying a burden we never needed to bear. We enrolled in the church's new believer classes and soaked up every lesson like sponges. We learned about prayer as conversation with God rather than ritualistic recitation. We discovered that the Bible wasn't just a book of rules but a love story between God and humanity. We found out that Christianity wasn't about following regulations, but about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. The work at the warehouse was physically demanding, but gave us purpose and independence. My brother and I were assigned to different shifts, which meant we could share the basement apartment more easily and save money. Our co-workers knew our story, and several of them became mentors who helped us understand how to live out our faith in practical ways. They showed us that Christianity wasn't just about Sunday services, but about how you treated people Monday through Saturday. The loneliness was the hardest part. We missed our family desperately, especially during holidays and special occasions. There were nights when I'd lie awake thinking about my mother, wondering if she was praying for us, hoping that someday she might understand why we'd made the choice we did. My brother and I supported each other through these difficult moments, but the ache of family separation never completely went away. About 6 months after our conversion, something unexpected happened. My youngest sister called me. She was only 16 and still living at home, but she'd been thinking about our conversation before we left. She said she'd been having dreams about Jesus, strange dreams that felt more real than regular dreams. She wanted to know more about what we'd experienced, about why we'd been willing to give up everything for our new faith. I met her secretly at a coffee shop near her school. She asked me to tell her the whole story again, every detail about that night in the backyard. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that gave me hope for the first time since we'd left home. "I've been reading one of the Bibles you left behind. Mother hid them, but I found them. I think I understand why you couldn't go back to Islam." That conversation was the beginning of a slow restoration process with parts of our family. My sister didn't convert immediately, but she kept asking questions, kept reading, kept having those dreams. Eventually she gave her life to Christ too, though she was wise enough to wait until she was 18 and could make the decision without facing the same consequences my brother and I had endured. My mother's attitude began to soften gradually. She never accepted our conversion, but she started speaking to us again, started allowing us to visit occasionally. She said she couldn't understand our decision, but she couldn't stop loving us either. Those brief visits became precious opportunities to demonstrate the love of Christ through our actions rather than our words. Today, 7 years after that December night, my brother and I are deeply involved in ministry to Muslims who are seeking Christ. We speak at churches, telling our story to encourage other believers to reach out to their Muslim neighbors. We work with organizations that provide safe houses and support for Muslim converts who face persecution. We've seen dozens of people come to faith through our testimony, and each new conversion reminds us of the grace that saved us. The Bibles we tried to burn that night are framed and hanging in our respective homes now. They're falling apart from constant use, but they serve as daily reminders of how God can take our rebellion and transform it into His glory. Those pages that wouldn't burn became the foundation for a ministry that has reached hundreds of people with the gospel. I'm telling you this story because I want you to know that God can reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. Maybe you're watching this and you've been running from God, just like my brother and I were. Maybe you think you've done something too terrible to be forgiven. Or maybe you've been raised in a different religion and think it's too late to change course. Look inside your own heart right now. Is Jesus calling your name? You don't need supernatural wind and fire like we experienced. You just need to be willing to say yes to Him, to acknowledge that He's Lord, to surrender your life to His love and grace. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the perfect circumstances. The God who stopped us from burning His word is the same God who's reaching out to you right now through this story. Will you kneel before Him today, just like my twin brother and I did that cold December night? Will you let Him transform your rebellion into worship, your questions into faith, your searching into finding? He's waiting for your answer, and His arms are open wide to welcome you home.